know it's a cliche way to start off a documentary, but I want you to do something for me. Imagine a world without communication. No writing, no reading, no script, no internet, no body signals, no expressions, no voice, and no language. Language incorporates every single one of these aspects. Whether it's verbal or binary, it's what keeps this world moving forward. It enables us to connect to our past and is simultaneously the bridge to our future. We look back while moving forward and become inspired by what was to create what will be. Language is a mechanism which enables us to understand our heritage and identity. And for Sikhs, both of those are exceedingly valuable. Before I get into more details about the language of the Sikhs, let's take a look at a case study which exemplifies the importance of language. During the Ottoman Empire, the Turks were united by the common language of Ottoman Turkish. The language incorporated syntactic structures and vocabulary from Arabic and Persian, thus making it one of the more complex but revered languages of its time. In November of 1928, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk came to power in Turkey and began instituting reforms in the country. Of these reforms, language was one of them. Atatürk insisted that the citizens adopt a new alphabet and purify the language to make it more modern and precise, making it easier to learn than the older language. The change called for reforms of both the spoken and written language. Despite what may be deemed as good intentions, the drastic reform and near abandonment of the original text and language meant a loss of connection to roots and heritage. Though literacy has increased through the years, the price of language reform has resulted in a drastic and considerably permanent separation from the literary and linguistic heritage of the Ottomans. Although some writings have been transliterated into the new Latin alphabet, the vocabulary and syntax of the mother tongue are hardly understandable to a speaker of modern Turkish. The point is, a person's linguistic and literary background can not only be used to connect to your roots and heritage, but it is an essential mechanism to get there. Furthermore, understanding your roots means understanding your heritage, and scriptural heritage is something that we as Sikhs should all make a conscious effort to realize.
This is not a human being telling us about a human being who had insight into Yahweh, Allah, whatever we want to call Krishna, but that's the word itself. And then the word becomes sacred. the writing becomes sacred. And it has to be a human need, that's so universal, so cross-cultural.
The Guru Granth Sahib consists of at least 7 hybridized or spoken groups of languages. But despite the diversity of languages and dialects used within the scriptural canon, what combines the Sikhs in our transnational diaspora more than anything else is not a language, but in fact our script. Every Sikh might have their own interpretation of the history of Rahat, their own opinions on eating meat or wearing a kara, or even their own perspectives on social and political issues throughout the world. But if there's one thing that every Sikh can agree on, that unifier is the Guru Granth Sahib. As adherents of the Guru Granth Sahib, we are people who believe in direct communication with Vaheguru, or one universal integrative force, popularly known by the term God. If we ever want to connect with the divine experience of the contributors, we have to have a more direct understanding of Gurbani, or divine poetry, at a personal level. That being said, The Guru Granth Sahib has ingenuity written all over it. It is the only scriptural canon which is compiled and authenticated by the Prophet. Its script is phonetic, meaning for one particular sound, there's one particular letter. In addition, the script is meant for the masses, leaving its practitioners without having to academically guess on what to do. I guess what I'm trying to say is that when the Gurus institutionalized Gurbani, they tried to make it as simple as possible so we could utilize it to our maximum potential.
You know, when we say Gurmukhi in a Sikh tradition, basically a lot of people think it's about something from the mouth of the Guru. But actually it's not really mouth of the Guru as I understand it, because everything came from the mouth of the Guru. Gurmukhi is what belongs to the Gurmukhs. So anything which the Gurus have given us belongs to the ones who follow the Guru, the ones who are inspired by the Guru. So Gurmukhi refers to everything, including the tradition, the culture, which belongs to the Guru-oriented ones. So that's my understanding of it.
In a deeper sense, Gurbani, the term referred for the language of the Guru Granth Sahib, is not just a communicative language, but a personal experience of the divine that descended in the form of Shabad through the speech of the Guru. When we set forth to understand Gurbani, it is imperative that we understand the historical influences which had an effect on the evolution of the languages and cultures of the land of the contributors. The contributors of hymns in the Guru Granth Sahib hailed from different parts of the South Asian subcontinent. Thus, most of their hymns have strong influence of their own mother tongue. Most of the compositions, or Bani, of the contributors of the Guru Granth Sahib are in what is known as Sadhu Bhasha, which consists of one dominant language, while words from other regional languages over the years become a part of that language. For example, one form of Sadhu Bhasha is where the Punjabi language is dominant. However, words from Sanskrit, Pali, Braj, Farsi, etc. may also become a part of it. Sadhu Bhasha had many different forms depending on the region and its dominant language. Its core consists of words from the two closely related languages of Guru Nanak's time, perhaps best described as Old Punjabi and Old Hindustani. Languages do not change their form overnight. It takes centuries for a language to adopt a recognizably distinct form. Although there is some disagreement among scholars as to the exact timings of the existence of certain languages, it is generally agreed upon that there was in fact a process of evolution of the languages of the land. Incidentally, nowhere does the issue of personal linguistic identity emerge more strongly than in relation to the questions of ethnicity and nationhood.
As this 6 billion will grow to 7 billion to 8 billion, I have to identify myself. And the best way I identify that was with where I was born. And I'm Kansas. Oh, English. That makes sense at all. That's my identity. And so when I hear other people from other languages, I'd say, well, theologically, I'm not one of them. I'm still trying to find out who I am here. And that's both good and bad, more bad than good, because then we start saying, I'm better than you. What Joseph Campbell calls, each one of us has a navel or an umbilical cord to where we were born, and that's real.
In relation to the factors such as language, religion, culture, and the various thought systems of the audience, the message of the Gurus was conveyed in a language and vocabulary that the listener could understand and also have an emotional bond with. The focus was on communicating the revealed message to spiritually and socially uplift the listener. The adoption of a local language as a symbol of group identity is well illustrated by the contributors of the Guru Granth Sahib. Additionally, the use of a different language by the same contributor is a sign of a distinct religious and political group. It is a signal of unity in everyday circumstances. An enormous amount of language contact was taking place during the period, and the inevitable result was multilingualism in the Guru Granth Sahib.
You know, in this case, this is not just ordinary literature. We are dealing with scripture, which for us, from a Sikh faith perspective, this is ilham, this is revelation, this is something which is the direct experience of the divine, of the gurus and the bhagats and other devout Sikhs and the parts. So when we are talking about interpretation of Gurbani, it's very, very important to understand that you're dealing with something which is from 12th century to 17th century. You have 500 years of language. When you have 500 years of language, they say language changes every 25 miles and every 25 years. For example, if you're reading Geoffrey Chaucer today, you need cliff notes to understand it. And you can't just use the contemporary English to understand it. So here you have a huge sample of language in the ordinary sense, which is covering 500 years.
Guru Granth Sahib is a treasury of old dialects and languages. The contributors use their mother tongue in addition to Sadhu Bhasha in their verses. The oldest specimen of the language is from 12th century by Bhagat Jayadev, whereas the latest is from the 17th century by Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib. At minimum, the Guru Granth Sahib is certainly one of the world's greatest collections of languages, an anthology of divine poetry, and a repository of classical music. Since Gurbani was uttered over a period spanning about 500 years, we find differences in the grammatical patterns even within a particular language. In addition, pronunciation is a related issue that has originated from enhanced knowledge of the grammar patterns of Gurbani.
So one of the things when we notice is, why is it that today people have different schools of thoughts on how they pronounce Gurbani? I think what we need to understand is most of us are not trained into it. We go through a training of 13 years before you graduate from high school. Here we have no training. So, Sikh Missionary College says pronounce it this way based on contemporary rules of grammar. Damdami Taksal says pronounce it in the old traditional way. What we really need to understand is we need to have a training. If we don't have proper training, our pronunciations are wrong. If our pronunciations are wrong, the meanings change. And if the meanings change, the interpretation will be wrong. So it's really, really important to go back to the original freshness of what Guru Nanak Sahib envisioned. And one way to do that is keep it simplistic, have some training in it, so you're able to actually personalize the message of Gurbani. And one way to do that is to learn the script on how it was developed based on the internal evidence available to us in Guru Granth Sahib.
Before we can even pronounce Gurbani, we must first acquire the language. And if language acquisition is as important as I deem it to be, how do we work to acquire it while living in a transnational reality where everyone doesn't understand the Guru Granth Sahib?
For children, learning a first language comes from their environment mainly, starting from recognition of what their parents are saying, what people around them are saying, and that recognition comes from repetition. So if you're saying a lot of things over and over again, they're acquiring that, and that knowledge is going into them. So you'll notice, the first thing that they'll start recognizing very easily is their name, because everyone around them actually is using their name or calling out their name.
What is the cost then of learning a second language? And we know as language researchers that there is some slight delay in learning both languages, and often children will mix one language with the other. A really good way of doing this, though, is for one parent to only be speaking one particular language and one parent to speak the other language. There have been a lot of studies in Spanish and English bilinguals, French, English bilinguals, mostly in Canada, that have looked at this sort of thing. And if one parent will become, say, the Spanish speaker and the other is the English speaker, that actually helps children sort out these two separate systems of language. We know that it's very difficult to read a language you don't speak. So when deaf children, for example, are learning ASL, people sometimes assume they can just pick up an English text and begin reading in English without understanding that American Sign Language is one particular language, English is another language. So it isn't really very easy for them to learn to read in a different language.
The difference also is that a child, for example, may not know that they want to learn a language, whereas when an adult chooses to learn a language, their cognitive skills are different to begin with, because they're already going in with the idea that we're there to learn. We're learning this language because I want to take this language and use it for something particular. For pleasure too, but mostly they're using it for something that is going to benefit them in some way or the other. So their emotional connection to that particular learning is higher.
It is sheer ingenuity to produce and organize an entire script from scrap. And in its earliest times, when the script is yet unformed, to write in it all is almost a work of genius. It requires the courage and force of great talent to compose in the language at all. The introduction of Gurmukhi holds even greater historical significance, as it was to be made the vehicle of a scripture belonging to a distinct faith that spoke against inequality and the dominance of the priest class over the common man. The script emphasized the accessibility of religious teachings to all. This is entirely in contrast to Sanskrit, which was the preserve of the Brahmins. As a distinctive religious script, it also confirmed the Sikh identity as separate from Hindus and Muslims both. While Gurmukhi was particularly developed as a means to record and convey the divine word, it also empowered the oppressed throughout the South Asia, as before the creation of the script, a majority of the population was prohibited from learning the language of religious texts. The Sikh doctrine rejected social inequalities and embraced the ideas of personal and direct interaction with the divine. The script holds great value for the people of Punjab, particularly the Sikhs, as almost all of Sikh literature is written in the script. The close relationship between language and religious belief is proved through cultural history. At the center of all world religions lies a body of sacred writing revered by the believers.
One other thought, and that is, there's a very excellent scholarship on how people in the United States treat the Constitution. That the Constitution of the United States has become a sacred text. So we have a Supreme Court, 9 people say, the sacred text really means this, the sacred text. Isn't that interesting that it's not just in a religious sense, it becomes secular. And here at Trinity, I'll bet you've got your Trinity student handbook, and you better know what's in there. So that word, when it's printed, becomes sacred. So that's another element. It gives, out of that chaos of spoken language, it kind of gives us a temporary, we agree by these rules.
Gurbani descended at a time when the region was conflicted and torn due to religious discord. Its arrival gave a new voice to the oppressed that changed the dominant paradigms. It transformed the whole society into a community of enlightened and divine-driven individuals. In the Sikh faith, Gurbani is the fulcrum of Sikhi and pivotal to it, from which Sikhs derive their strength and direction. A proper interpretation is the key to understanding vital ideological points that the Guru made by consciously choosing to write a multilingual scripture in an independent script.
In order to interpret these things, you have some tools available. For example, you don't want to just use grammar to interpret these things. It's very important to know the grammar. But remember, Gurbani is written for everyday people. It was in a spoken and hybridized forms, as they say. So first thing is really you need to understand the context of things. And second thing is understand the meanings of the words. And then the third level is understanding the grammar of these things. If you take all those 3 things, you use historical references available, you take the concordances or encyclopedias or reference works available, all that stuff is reference. What you really need to do is take all that and then personalize it, and this is the way to interpret it. So saying that only grammar is the way to do it, saying that only history is the way to do it, saying only the religious understanding is the way to do it, these are creating unnecessary dimensions in your mind. The idea is to take all these things as references, as tools, and the more tools you have, the better interpretation it will be, and that's how it needs to be looked upon.
Without the proper understanding of Gurbani, we stand to lose its original freshness from which it was revealed. It is the great potential, the divinity and the Shabad that transpired to quench the burning earth, a force that permeates and vibrates in every heart just waiting to be realized. Regular definitions of the modern-day language don't suffice for Gurbani. Gurbani transcends the typical purpose of a language, stretching beyond grammatical limits, defying established patterns and styles, surpassing measures defining poetry and prose, traveling into the realm of human soul, where wonder and awe replace speech.